The first time I saw her, I thought I was looking into a mirror. Same height, same shade of brown hair, same faint scar above the eyebrow, the one I'd earned years ago from slipping in the kitchen. But the woman standing at my door wasn't my reflection. She was my husband's other wife. I remember the way the air seemed to thicken between us. The world fell silent, no traffic outside, no ticking clock behind me, only the faint hum of my own heartbeat pounding inside my ears. She held a small leather bag in her hand and a photograph pressed against her chest. Her lips trembled when she said softly, "My name is Claire. I think we need to talk about Daniel." That was my husband's name. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I just stood there in my robe, coffee cooling in my hand, the morning sunlight stretching across the kitchen tiles. It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday. Pancakes, a grocery list, maybe a call to my sister later. But that day, that moment would split my life clean in half. It's strange how quickly a life can change, isn't it? One moment you're safe, comfortable, certain of the person sleeping beside you, and the next you're questioning everything. When I think back now, I realize there were signs, tiny, insignificant things that I brushed aside because love makes us blind. Or maybe just hopeful. Daniel and I had been married for 12 years. We met at a community fundraiser. He was charming, steady, the kind of man who made people feel at ease. He'd grown up in another town, said his parents had passed early, and that he'd moved here for work. He never talked much about his past, but I respected that. We all have things we'd rather not revisit. Together, we built what I thought was a quiet, honest life. He ran a small architecture firm. I managed a local library. Our days were filled with gentle routines, morning coffee, evening walks, shared dinners that sometimes stretched late into the night. He had this habit of touching the back of my neck when he'd pass behind me in the kitchen, a small, familiar gesture that made me feel loved without words. We weren't perfect, of course. No marriage is. He traveled often for work, 3, sometimes 4 days at a time, but he always called before bed. His voice would sound tired, sometimes distant, but he'd end every call the same way. "I love you, Anna. Always." And I believed him, because I wanted to. The morning it all began, I was watering the plants by the front window when a car pulled into the driveway, a silver sedan I didn't recognize. A woman stepped out, well-dressed, nervous, clutching her bag tight. I remember thinking she looked lost. But when she lifted her head and our eyes met, a chill swept over me. She looked familiar in an unsettling way, like a face you half remember from a dream. When I opened the door, she just stared for a second, her lips parting in disbelief. Then she whispered, "You're her." "Excuse me?" I asked. Her hand shook as she held out a photo. It was of Daniel standing beside her, smiling, arm wrapped around her shoulders. He was wearing the same jacket he'd worn last winter on our anniversary trip to Murray. The room started spinning then. She told me her name, her story, that she and Daniel had been married for 8 years, that they'd met through a mutual friend in Karachi, that he traveled for work, often disappearing for days, but always came back to her. And now, after months of unanswered calls and vague excuses, she'd tracked him down. I don't remember much of what I said after that. I think I asked her to sit. Maybe I poured tea out of habit. Maybe I just stood there, staring at the photo in my hand, unable to feel my own body. 2 wives, 1 man. 2 lives carefully built on the same foundation of lies. That night, when Daniel came home, I didn't scream. I didn't even cry. I just waited, sitting by the kitchen table, the photo between us like a loaded weapon. He walked in, loosened his tie, kissed my forehead, and asked if dinner was ready. I watched him for a long moment before I finally said quietly, "Daniel, who is Claire?" The color drained from his face. His hand froze midair. And then for the first time in 12 years, I saw something unfamiliar in his eyes. Not love, not guilt, but fear. I've replayed that night in my mind more times than I can count. The way he stuttered, searching for words that could somehow make it all untrue. The way his hands trembled when I placed the photograph in front of him, and the way my heart broke. Not in one shattering instant, but slowly, painfully, like glass cracking under pressure. He said he could explain. He said he never meant to hurt me. But how do you explain having 2 wives, 2 homes, 2 versions of yourself? He begged me to listen, said it started years before we met, that he'd married Claire young, that the relationship had been dying long before he found me. He told me he'd tried to leave, but she was fragile, dependent, and he couldn't bear to hurt her. So he did what cowards do best. He lived 2 lives. That night I didn't throw him out, not yet. Because part of me, the part that still clung to the life we'd built, needed to know everything. Who else knew? Where did he spend his birthdays? Which wife was the lie and which was the truth? He said he loved me more, that with me he was his real self. And maybe that was supposed to comfort me, but all it did was make me realize the depth of his deceit, that he had practiced love like a performance, convincing not just me but himself that he could live this way forever. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet rhythm of a man I no longer knew breathing beside me. It's strange the moment you realize that the person you trusted most is a stranger. It's not loud. It's not explosive. It's quiet, empty, cold, and in that silence, I knew the woman who'd shown up at my door wasn't just here to confront me. She was here to set me free, even if it meant burning the life I thought I knew. That night was the first time I truly saw Daniel. Not the man I'd built my routines around, not the man who fixed the leaky sink or rubbed my shoulders when I came home tired, but a stranger, a man who'd mastered the art of pretending. I didn't sleep at all. I just lay there, tracing back every quiet, ordinary moment in our marriage. The trips he took, the birthdays he missed, the nights he said his flight got delayed. It was like watching a movie in reverse. All the smiles, all the little reassurances. They looked different now, like props. In the morning, Daniel tried to act as if nothing had happened. He made coffee, my favorite kind, and asked if I wanted toast. I remember just standing by the counter, watching him butter the bread with that same careful calmness. It made my stomach turn. "Daniel," I said, my voice shaking, "I need the truth. All of it." He sighed, set the knife down, and looked at me. His eyes were red, tired, maybe from guilt, maybe from fear. He told me they'd met when he was 25, that Claire had been his college sweetheart. They'd married quickly, too quickly, and by the time he realized they weren't right for each other, she was already pregnant. "But she lost the baby," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "After that, she wasn't the same. I couldn't leave her like that. I tried to help, but it never got better. And so you married me?" I asked. He didn't answer. I think that was the moment something inside me snapped, not from anger, but from the weight of disbelief. For the next few days, I tried to function. I went to work, sorted books, smiled at library visitors. But inside, I was unraveling quietly, piece by piece. When you're betrayed like that, the hardest part isn't the lie itself, it's how easily life keeps moving. The sun still rises. The bills still arrive. People still ask how you're doing. And you lie, just like the person who lied to you. I'm fine, but I wasn't fine. I was standing in the ruins of the life I thought I had, pretending to still know my way around. 3 days later, I called Claire. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe another fight. Maybe some desperate attempt to hurt each other. But when she answered, her voice sounded small, defeated. "I didn't come to destroy your marriage," she said. "I came because I needed to know if mine ever really existed." That line stuck with me, because I realized we were both living the same nightmare. Two women, each trying to make sense of a man who'd played God with our lives. We met again, this time in a small cafe halfway between our towns. I remember the smell of coffee beans, the hum of people chatting around us, and the way the sunlight caught the gold chain around her neck. A chain identical to the one Daniel gave me on our 10th anniversary. When I saw it, I nearly laughed. He hadn't even bothered to change the gifts. We talked for nearly 2 hours. She showed me texts, pictures, receipts, the kind of proof you don't want but can't look away from. I learned things I never imagined. That when he said he was in Karachi for a project, he was with her. That the client dinners he always mentioned were birthdays, anniversaries with her. That he'd even promised to take her on a Europe trip last summer, the same trip he canceled with me, claiming he couldn't get time off. By the time I got home, I felt hollow. There were no tears left, only a numb sort of clarity. That night, Daniel tried to touch me. He reached for my hand, his voice soft. "Anna, please. I made a mistake. Let's just start over." But his words sounded empty now, like echoes in a room I no longer lived in. "Start over?" I said quietly. "With which wife, Daniel?" He froze. For a long time, neither of us said a word. Finally, he whispered, "I ended things with Claire." "When?" "Yesterday." I smiled then, but it wasn't the kind of smile that meant forgiveness. It was the kind that comes when the truth has burned everything else down. "Then I guess," I said softly, "you're about to end things with me too." The next morning, I called my sister Lisa. We'd grown apart over the years. She'd always thought Daniel was too polished, too rehearsed. When I told her everything, she didn't sound surprised. "I warned you about men who hide their past," she said gently. "But you loved him, and love makes us all stupid." Her words weren't cruel. They were honest. Sometimes honesty hurts worse than lies. I started noticing all the cracks then. Receipts in his jacket pockets, hotel bookings from weekends he said he was at conferences. A second phone in his drawer, cheap, old, but still working. Emails hidden under aliases. He hadn't just built a second marriage, he'd built an entire double life. The man who promised me loyalty had lived in two worlds, walking between them so smoothly that neither wife ever saw the whole truth. I looked around our house, every photo, every memory, and I wondered how many of these smiles were real. How many of them were just him, performing love. That evening, as I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, I saw our wedding photo hanging through the window. I couldn't look at it anymore, so I took it down. Not out of anger, but because I needed to start letting go. When Daniel came home that night, he found the picture missing. He didn't ask where it was. He just stared at the empty spot on the wall, then at me, and said quietly, "You've made up your mind, haven't you?" I nodded, because by then I had. The part of me that had begged for answers was gone. All that remained was a quiet determination to reclaim my life, one painful step at a time. But life, as it often does, had one more twist waiting. The next morning, Claire showed up again. Only this time, she wasn't alone, and what she told me next would unravel Daniel's lies in a way even he couldn't control. When I opened the door that morning, I froze. Claire stood there, pale, trembling, holding a small boy by the hand. He couldn't have been more than 6. His eyes were brown, familiar, too familiar. "This is Ethan," she said softly. "Daniel's son." The world tilted. I stepped aside, wordless, letting them in as if my body moved on its own. The boy clung to her skirt, peeking at me with curious eyes. He had Daniel's nose, Daniel's quiet way of looking at people like he was reading their thoughts. I couldn't breathe. "I thought you said you lost the baby," I whispered, remembering Daniel's words. Claire looked away, her voice shaking. "That's what he told you, didn't he?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. Hospital papers, birth certificate, photographs, proof, cold, undeniable proof. "He didn't lose a baby, Anna. He lost his honesty." She looked around my living room like she was trying to map out her own heartbreak. Every frame, every flower vase, every couch cushion seemed to mock her, reminders of the other life he'd built. "I didn't come here to hurt you," she said. "But he stopped sending money. He's been avoiding my calls. I didn't know what else to do." Money. It hit me then. The missing savings, the investments, the half-explained withdrawals from our account. He hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He'd been funding another family with our money. I felt a rush of heat in my chest, anger clawing its way through the numbness. Before I could respond, the front door opened again. Daniel walked in, and for the first time he looked afraid. "What are you doing here?" he asked Claire, voice low, almost pleading. She stepped in front of Ethan. "He deserves to know who his father really is, and she deserves the truth." He turned to me. "Anna, please." "No," I said sharply. "Don't you dare talk your way out of this. You look at me, Daniel, and you tell me the truth. All of it." He opened his mouth, but no words came. Ethan shifted behind his mother's leg. "Mommy, is that Daddy's other house?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the walls seemed to hold their breath. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes, Daniel begging me to listen, Claire crying quietly, the boy sitting on the couch swinging his legs, too young to understand the wreckage around him. But what I remember most was the calm that settled inside me. Because when you've been lied to for that long, there comes a moment when pain turns into clarity. And in that clarity, you stop chasing answers. You start planning consequences. That night, after they left, Daniel tried to explain again. "She was sick," he said. "You don't understand what she went through. I didn't want to abandon her. I was trying to do the right thing." "The right thing?" I cut him off. "You built a life on lies, Daniel. You didn't just hurt me. You hurt her. You hurt that child." He ran his hand over his face, his voice cracking. "I was trapped, Anna. I couldn't choose between you." "No," I said coldly. "You did choose. You chose yourself." I spent that night on the couch, staring at the ceiling until morning. At some point, I must have drifted off because when I woke up, Daniel was gone. his closet half empty, his phone missing, and his wedding ring left on the kitchen counter next to a note. I'll fix this. I just need time. I laughed when I read it because time was exactly what he'd stolen from me. All those years of pretending. Over the next week, I learned more than I ever wanted to. Calls from banks. Letters addressed to Daniel Walker and Claire Johnson. A hidden account with joint transactions. And one particularly painful discovery. A mortgage in my name for a house I'd never seen. It took everything in me not to crumble. Lisa came over one night and found me sitting on the floor surrounded by papers. She didn't say anything at first, just sat beside me and took my hand. After a while, she said softly, "You have to decide whether you want revenge or peace. Because you can't have both, but I wasn't sure I wanted either. What I wanted was justice." 3 weeks later, I met with Claire again. We sat in that same cafe, though this time neither of us cried. "I've decided to go to the police," I said quietly. "He forged my name on property documents." "That's fraud," she nodded slowly. "And I've filed for child support. He's been dodging payments for years." We looked at each other, two women bound by the same betrayal, finally taking our power back. "Do you think he ever really loved either of us?" she asked. I thought about that for a moment. "Maybe he loved the version of himself that each of us believed in," I said. "But not us. Never us." A month later, the police called. They'd found Daniel in another city, living under a fake name, renting a small apartment. When they arrested him, he was reportedly calm, almost relieved, like a man who'd finally run out of lies to live in. The trial took months. I sat through every hearing, listening to lawyers talk about him like he was just a case number. Forgery, fraud, bigamy. Words that once belonged to strangers now belonged to my husband. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, I didn't cry. I just exhaled. For the first time in years, I could finally breathe. After the sentencing, Claire approached me outside the courthouse. Ethan was with her, clutching her hand. He looked up at me and smiled, that innocent, curious smile. "I like your earrings," he said shyly. It was such a simple thing, but it broke me in ways Daniel never could. Because in that child's eyes, I saw everything that had been stolen: trust, truth, and time. I bent down and smiled back. "Thank you, sweetheart. Take care of your mom, okay?" He nodded proudly. "I will." And in that moment, I realized something. The story didn't end with Daniel's fall. It ended with our survival. But healing is never tidy. Even after justice, there's the quiet, the space where pain echoes, softer each day, but still there. And in that quiet, I had to face myself again. Who was I without him? Without the lie that had defined so many years of my life? The days after the verdict felt strange, almost unreal. For so long, my life had been about surviving the storm that was Daniel. Now that the storm was gone, I didn't know what to do with the silence it left behind. People in town whispered, "Of course." Small towns have long memories and louder mouths. Every trip to the grocery store felt like walking through invisible eyes. Some pitied me. Some judged me. Some said things like, "You're so brave, Anna," as if bravery was something I'd chosen. But the truth? I wasn't brave. I was just broken and tired of pretending I wasn't. One morning, I walked down to the beach near my cottage. The sky was pale blue, the waves lazy and slow. I hadn't stepped foot on that sand since the night everything fell apart. As I stood there watching the water slide over my feet, I realized something simple and almost frightening. No one was coming to save me. Not Daniel. Not Lisa, not time. Healing wasn't a thing that happened to you. It was something you chose every single day. So that morning I decided to start over. Not as Daniel's wife. Not as a victim, just as me. The first thing I did was sell the old house. Too many ghosts lived in those walls. Ghosts that wore his cologne, his laughter, his voice saying "I love you" and meaning nothing. Packing was harder than I thought. Every drawer had memories hiding in it. Love letters, photos, the perfume he once said reminded him of summer nights. But with each box I sealed, I felt a little lighter. By the time the movers came, I didn't even look back. Some doors aren't meant to be closed gently. They need to be slammed shut, loud enough that you never feel tempted to reopen them. Lisa helped me move into the cottage permanently. We painted the kitchen white, replaced the curtains, planted roses out front. For the first time, my home felt like mine. One evening, as the sun slipped into the sea, Lisa handed me a cup of tea and said, "You know, I don't think people heal from betrayal. I think they grow around it." I smiled. "Like a tree around a scar." Exactly, she said. The scar never goes away. It just becomes part of your strength. Claire and I stayed in touch. Strange, isn't it? How two people can start as strangers bound by pain and end up as friends bound by resilience. She called one evening, her voice softer now, steadier. Ethan started school today, she said. He told his teacher his dad is in heaven. My chest tightened. What did you say? I told him, she whispered, that sometimes heaven is just the place where the truth finally rests. We were both quiet for a while after that. Sometimes silence says what words can't. Months passed. The trial turned into paperwork. The paperwork turned into closure. Slowly, I stopped introducing myself as the woman whose husband lied. I was just Anna again. I began teaching art classes at the local community center. It wasn't much, just a few kids with messy paintbrushes and louder imaginations, but it filled the empty spaces in my days. One little girl named Ruby once asked me, "Miss Anna, what do you paint when you're sad?" I told her, light. Because even when I can't see it, I like to believe it's still there. She smiled and said, "Then your paintings must glow." And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. But life has a way of testing your peace. One afternoon, a letter arrived. No name, no return address, just my name written in familiar handwriting. Daniels. I sat there for a long while before opening it. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of the past pressing against the present. It was short, barely half a page. Anna, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I see it now. All of it. What I did to you, to Claire, to Ethan. I thought I was protecting everyone, but I was really protecting my own cowardice. You deserved better. You always did. I'm sorry. Daniel. I folded the letter back carefully, like it might break if I moved too fast. For a long time, I just stared at it. Then I walked to the fireplace, lit a match, and watched the flame curl around his words until nothing remained but ash. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't always mean letting someone back in. Sometimes it just means letting them go completely. Seasons changed. The roses bloomed. The sea stayed. I learned to laugh again, the kind of laughter that doesn't need explanation or apology. I took long walks, cooked for one, danced barefoot in my kitchen when it rained. And every now and then, I caught my reflection and barely recognized the woman in the mirror because she looked free. A year later, I saw Claire again. We met for coffee, like old friends do, when time has softened the edges of their shared pain. Ethan had grown taller. His eyes still carried that spark, Daniel's spark, but without the shadow. He showed me his drawing of a family, him, his mom, and a small golden sun above them. "There's no dad?" I asked gently. He grinned. "Mom says some stories don't need all the characters to be happy." And just like that, the ache in my heart turned into warmth. Sometimes people ask me if I ever think about Daniel, if I miss him. I do, but not in the way they think. I miss the idea of him. The man I thought I had. The life I thought we shared. But that man never really existed. He was a story I told myself because I was afraid of silence. Now I've learned to love that silence. It's where I hear my truest voice. When I tell people my story, they often say, "I could never survive something like that." But the truth is, we survive much more than we think we can. The heart may break, but it also rebuilds quietly, like waves smoothing a shattered shore. And maybe that's the real lesson of all this. Sometimes the greatest love story you'll ever live is the one you write with yourself, after the heartbreak, after the lies, after the world stops spinning. Because that's when you finally start living for real. It's been 3 years since that night, the night the other woman walked into my home and shattered the story I thought I was living. Sometimes, when I walk past the ocean now, I think about that moment, not with anger, not even with sorrow, but with an odd kind of gratitude. Because that night, painful as it was, became the start of the truest version of my life. The cottage has changed since then. There's a garden now, full of lavender, mint, and those stubborn little daisies that bloom even when the soil is poor. Every morning, I sit on the porch with my tea and watch the light fall across the water. The same sea that once felt endless and cruel now feels like an old friend, steady, patient, forgiving. Funny how time can do that, how it turns pain into perspective. Last week, I found one of Daniel's old photographs in a box I'd missed during the move. It was taken years ago, both of us laughing in the kitchen, his arm around me, flour on my face. For a long while, I just stared at it. Then I smiled. Because that woman, the one in the picture, she loved deeply. She believed, she trusted, she hoped. And even though the man beside her betrayed all of that, her heart never stopped being kind. That's what I hold on to. Not the betrayal. Not the lies. Just the proof that I was capable of love that pure and that I still am. I sometimes visit the town where we used to live. It doesn't feel like home anymore, and that's okay. Some places belong to the version of you that no longer exists. One afternoon, I saw Lisa outside the cafe where we used to meet. She hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "You look different," she said. "Lighter?" I laughed softly. Maybe that's because I finally put down everything that wasn't mine to carry. She smiled in that way only true friends do. The kind that tells you they've watched you fall apart. And they're proud of the person you became after. Claire moved to another city with Ethan. She sends pictures sometimes, him in his school uniform, him holding a trophy, him smiling without shadows. And every time I see that little boy's grin, I think about how the choices of one man could have broken us both. But instead, somehow, they bound us together in understanding. We don't talk about Daniel anymore. We talk about hope, about motherhood, about healing. She once said to me, maybe we were both meant to love him, not because he deserved it, but because we needed to learn what love isn't. And I think she was right. A few months ago, I started recording stories, little audio pieces, small reflections about forgiveness, resilience, and quiet courage. It began as therapy, but people started listening. They wrote letters, shared their own stories of broken marriages, lost trust, second chances. And somewhere along the way, I realized something beautiful. Pain, when shared with honesty, becomes connection. And connection, that's how we heal. The world will tell you that healing looks like moving on, but I've learned it's more like moving through. You walk through the grief, through the anger, through the emptiness, until one day, you step into the sunlight and realize the world still feels beautiful. Not because it's perfect, but because you survived to see it. I still wear my wedding ring, not out of attachment, but as a reminder. Not of him, but of me. Of the woman who stood in the middle of her own undoing and decided to rebuild anyway. And when people ask me why, I simply say, because even a broken circle still means forever, just not in the way I once thought. So tonight, as the sea hums its quiet song outside my window, I light a candle on the sill. The flame flickers soft and steady. It reminds me that peace isn't loud. It doesn't shout or demand, it just is. I think about all the women who've loved men who weren't who they said they were. All the hearts that broke quietly behind closed doors. All the souls who found the courage to start again. And I whisper, we made it. We really did. You know, if I've learned anything from this journey, it's that truth has its own way of finding the light. You can hide it for years, bury it beneath charm, excuses, or love, but it always finds air. And when it does, it burns everything false to the ground. But don't be afraid of that fire, because from those ashes, something stronger is always born. Now I live simply. I read before bed. I walk barefoot on the beach. I love quietly, without needing promises. And when I look back, I don't see tragedy anymore. I see a woman who walked through her own darkness and came out shining. Maybe that's what healing really means. Not forgetting what broke you, but learning to hold it so gently that it no longer hurts. So I'll end my story here, with this thought. Sometimes the person you thought would destroy you becomes the reason you discover your strength. And sometimes the ending you never wanted becomes the beginning you always needed. Would you have done what I did? Would you have stayed and fought or walked away to find your peace? Share your thoughts in the comments. And remember, every week I share stories just like this one, real stories, true hearts. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we live ourselves.